This is not a Harry Styles inspired cardigan tutorial, this is in fact a Harry Styles cardigan inspired sweater inspired jacket video. Other than the basic patchwork template that's practically all over YouTube, I didn't use a pattern and just made things up as I went along. Of course I had a rough idea of what I wanted it to look like, and this is usually how I work. Not knowing what I'm doing brings me a level of comfort I can't quite express. And if you can relate to that, then this video is for you. First, I'm going to go through the main patchwork template with the 15 square back panel, the 2 6 square front panels, and the 2 9 square sleeves. As you've probably noticed already, my pattern isn't entirely symmetrical. And contrary to popular belief, that's actually okay, just make sure your pattern looks the way you like it. Now let's take a look at the numbers. For this project I used 3 different colours in DK yarn. Feel free to use as many different colours as you like, or even just 2. Each square is approximately 15 by 15 centimeters or 6 by 6 inches and weighs just under 12 grams. Since we need 45 squares in total, there will be 15 squares in each colour. That's a total of 540 grams for the patchwork alone. With the additional finishes, that takes us to 900 grams, and so roughly 300 grams are needed for each colour. You can also add around 50 grams or so to be on the safe side. To make the patchwork itself, you can knit the squares separately before sewing them together. But if I'm honest, this process turned into a Kafka novel pretty quickly for me, and I just had to do something else. This is totally just a personal preference, and I know a lot of people actually really like the sewing method. That being said, if you want to try something different, here's my intarsia tutorial up here. For casting off, I used the stretchy bind off method using a darning needle, which you can see here. I basically think of it as taking 2 steps forward and 1 step back. Although that might sound quite depressing, it works really well. What you're left with is this amazing stretch, and I honestly haven't been able to go back to the normal cast off method. You can weave in your ends at any time, but I like to tidy as I go along. You don't have to leave your ends as long as mine, but I like to tie them together. This way they don't end up escaping as easily, just like the hostages in my neighbor's basement. I'm kidding, basements aren't really a thing over here. They're probably in his attic or something. The chores were finally complete and it was time to start constructing. I started with the sleeves, but again there's no set rule for this, just preference. One day BuzzFeed will finally get round to making a quiz on what making your sleeves first says about you, but in the meantime you can check out your D&D alignment. Next I tested out the ribbing on my cuffs since they're a lot less work than the waistband and I really didn't want to make a mistake on something so much bigger. I knitted into the edge of the sleeve in an anti-clockwise direction with the wrong side facing me. If this sounds like it's about to go wrong, it did, so I quickly undid it and started again with the right side facing me instead. This way the overlapping edge was on the wrong side and invisible from the right side. However, eventually using my rib tightening technique, which I've linked up above, I realised I preferred the ribbing on the wrong side, so I then unravelled all of my hard work. Then I made a magic loop in the hope that the wizarding world would somehow save me from this mild inconvenience. Alas, Dumbledore is dead, and it did not, so I flipped my work over to have the wrong side facing me again, except this time it was the right thing to do. To knit the stripes into the ribbing, I purled each first row of colour change to make sure that the line on the right side didn't have a running stitch next to it. The stitch I'm talking about is visible in this picture here, which is on the wrong side. After about another 2 days of knitting, here are the finished cuffs. It's kind of funny how fast everything looks in video, but this really took a long time. And now we're finally onto the placket. The placket basically makes up for the 15cm gap between the 2 front panels and supports the center front zip. It's essentially the neckline. I decided to single crochet mine to give it some rigidity, but you can totally knit it if you prefer things a little less stiff. Okay, for some reason I then zoomed off without filming this and crocheted the shoulder seams before knitting what has to be the most pathetic excuse for a ribbed collar I have ever seen. What was I thinking? Anyway, since it was part of the process, I might as well share it with you, and you can also avoid making weird baby collars like this one. Okay, so it's not a huge mistake, but this took me a really long time. Moving on, this is a good time to show you the plackets and how it attaches to everything. Don't worry, if it looks a bit complicated, I've just changed the color. I also made a single decrease for every 2 rows to create the illusion of a more rounded neckline. Although, truth be told, it was pretty much a choking hazard at this point. Initially, before taking everything apart, I crocheted the joining tab for the front of the collar, and I have to say, it was kind of successful in achieving the bomber jacket look I wanted. Sadly, it wasn't meant to be, and so I knitted a much longer version with the double stripe to match the cuffs. You can see that this one is much longer, and this was so that I could fold it over. I was really looking for something a little warmer and not so flimsy. Then I cast off as usual, except this time I picked up from the neckline before binding off. This way I wouldn't have to stitch everything together after I'd already cast off. This stretch is everything. This time, instead of making a bomber jacket collar, I wanted to make a funnel collar. Doing this would make the jacket feel a little sportier, and it would probably match the stripes a little better too. For the tabs, I crocheted them instead of knit them, but like I said before, you can do either. Looking back, I definitely would have doubled up on them just to make them as thick as the rest of the collar. Here's how everything fits together, and you can see how I've made the decreases towards the front. Remember before when I crocheted the sleeve seam? That wasn't the best idea, and stitching it together made it more flush with the rest of the fabric. Unfortunately, this wasn't too long before I discovered the mattress stitch on TikTok, and I'll go through that later on. Ever heard of the term ignorance is bliss? Well, here's what it looks like. Here we are with another example, and this is the side seam. I'm sewing up 1.5 squares, and the rest of it will be the sleeve hole. Finally, it was time to make the waistband. Instead of knitting in between each of the garter stitch ridges, I skipped every other ridge, fitting only 15 stitches into each square. I had made my comeback. The gathering was beautiful. It was perhaps even my proudest moment up until this point. And then the cage came down. I soon realized that my first color change had in fact bled into the placket. Don't get me wrong, I was perfectly aware that knitting into the placket itself had its risks. But why did it have to be so ugly? Was I ready to give up? Let's just say that the sunk cost fallacy is real. And my motivation was mainly fueled by the fear of losing all of that effort and time. But was it worth it in the end? Yes, it totally was. The waistband was essentially the collar's more attractive sibling. Not only that, but it had just spent the past few months in a carb-heavy bulk. Finally, I used the same stretchy bind-off method. Okay, sleeve time. I have to say I ended up taking this apart, but like I said before, I'll get to that later. Here, I made sure that the right sides were facing each other before matching up the seams and stitching everything together. Again, I didn't use the mattress stitch at this point, but I definitely recommend it. It is now time for the dreaded zipper. There are definitely better ways to do this, and they don't involve stretching out the entire center front to fit the zip, which is already way too long as it is. That's what I did, so don't do that. In the end, I redid the zip, which left around a 10cm excess from what started off as a 60cm zipper. Back to that thing I said I'd talk about, the mattress stitch. Had it saved me, or had it just cost me even more precious moments of my life? You tell me. Either way, this sleeve seam was wonkier than Willy himself, and I had to change it. I flipped everything back to the top side, and only then did I realize that the knit was actually running in different directions, making the mattress stitch some sort of couch stitch instead. Despite the cold sweat that ran through my very core, I persevered and it worked out pretty well in the end. So well in fact, that I decided to use the same stitch to tidy up the lazy intarsia that I'd just spent half the jacket knitting and totally regretted. Needless to say, I won't be recommending it to you. You can really see the difference here. I think it's really obvious to say this, but this was incredibly tedious. And if anything, it really gave some extra spice to the meaning of slow fashion. If you've made it to the end of this video, congratulations for lasting this long. Please don't forget to like and subscribe, and I'll see you in the next one.